This is a new purchase I've made to give me a lockdown project, as we're not at the end of lockdown yet, and I think I needed to have something else to do, or as early as I could find, precision lathe. So I've gone for a Lorch Schmidt and Co. from Frankfurt, and this is a lathe that was made sometime between 1890 and 1920. I'd like to think it was as old as 1890, but probably not, I don't know now. But it is in quite reasonably original condition, rather to my amazement. It's not in bad condition at all. If you look very carefully on the photographs here, if I zoom in and you look at the ways, you may just be able to pick out along the bottom edge there's a line along here. There's not a lip on it, but there is a line, but that's the only visible wear on the bed. But bearing in mind this is a lathe that operates really on this length rather than on the bed, you just move this around to where you want to do the machining. Now, the one thing that attracted me to this lathe more than anything was the fact that it had got a built-in screw cutting attachment, and in fact really quite a sophisticated one, because it uses gears. It's missing a couple of little bits, because where this lever is here, there should be a rod going through here. This should fall off there, like that. So that's something that needs to be added to it. Now there's some cross slide. If you turn the handle clockwise, you would expect that it would run in that direction. Now if you turn anti-clockwise, it goes in, so it's the complete opposite of what you would normally have on a lathe. And the reason is because there's a right hand thread in the thread of the lathe on this axis, and similarly on the other thread in the cross slide, on the top slide. I'll take that out for the moment. If I turn the handle clockwise, it comes away from the work rather than towards it. That's again a right-handed thread, so I'll have to change those for a left-handed thread there and a left-handed thread there. And the only complication I can see in doing that is that I need to make sure all the gearing ratios will still work, and I'll have to add an extra gear to make sure that the gear train revolves to still give me turning in the right direction when I'm screw cutting. On tailstock, that's just the same as any other tailstock, but I did discover the tangs on each of these has been left too long, so there's an awful lot of wasted motion, which is indicated underneath this surface rust here, that there's that much movement that's not being used. It's come rather than, this is a Morse taper one, I believe. I'd be able to chop the tangs off, that's not a problem. And this is quite a nice Jacobs chuck, same sort that I'd use on any of the other lathes I've got. It does have some collets, and there's only two, but these are a difficult size to get hold of. They're 12.5 millimeters in diameter, and I don't know whether I'd ever be able to find anywhere from any other source. There's a slot here to take a pin inside the headstock, and in common with a lot of lathes that have that provision, someone's poked a drill down and taken the little pin off, which is a bit annoying. But that does at least enable 12.5 or sorry, 12.5 millimetre or half-inch stock through. On the headstock there's a collet closer which goes right the way through the headstock. Nothing terribly unusual about that, except it's got a nice handle instead of the round ones that you usually see. And all the gear wheels have got very antiquated looking by today's standards, very large gears which are spoked. And there's quite a decent array of gear wheels, and I've done a quick check and I should be able to cut a number of metric gear ratios running from 2 millimeters down to about 0.5 millimeters, which would be quite adequate, and one fine setting. The chuck is a normal 3-jaw chuck, and use the back plate for another chuck if I wanted to. And rather surprisingly, this does have a back gear, which when I first got the lathe I couldn't figure out why it was locked in position, and then I discovered there's a pin which somebody had put in there, tapered pin, which locks this, and when I unlocked it it wouldn't move. I just pulled the pin out and tried and then I discovered after tapping it with the hammer this had probably never been moved into position for maybe 40, 50 or more years. None of the teeth are broken. It's in perfect working order, so that will be nice to get that running again. And all of the teeth for the back gears all sit underneath these very nice little thin rims, thin little guards here. Now I haven't got a manual for this lathe. I don't think there's one available unless anybody has one. I think there's none that I can find on the internet, so it's obviously fairly unusual if I can get hold of one. It looks like there's a hard steel bearing on the main spindle at the front. There'll be a bronze one at the back, and should be a ball thrust race sitting under the cover at the back. Until I get it apart I won't really know for sure. And there's various adjustments, collars here and here to take out the end play. There doesn't seem to be too much movement when I've tried it, so I'm fairly hopeful this might be in really quite decent condition. The only thing that gives me some slight trepidation is that I noticed that somebody has fitted a nice honest bit of shimming underneath the tailstock, because obviously the tailstock has worn and dropped slightly on the bed, but that's not a problem. Plenty of people have done field repairs like that. There are lots of nice little touches on this that I like. This is the handle for the top slide, and obviously when you're using this in drive mode so that you've got power to the top slide, you don't really want a handle on it, so you just pull it off. The graduation on these is they're in 1 millimeter steps. Top slide, the thread is a 2 millimeter pitch metric thread. No problem to get hold of Acme, so I'd replace these with Acme threaded rods, and in here as well. There's quite a bit of movement and it's not worth reusing them. Not even worth fiddling with them. I'll clean them all up and replace them. And when this is finished, this should be a very nice lathe to run. It should be capable of quite a lot of heavy work despite its small size, and I'm looking forward to getting it to run. The lathe did come with some pulley work. I don't know whether people are very in favour of using old-fashioned pulley arrangements, but personally I don't think I'm going to be using it unless I change it so that I can mount the electric motor underneath it maybe. I'll think about that. Yeah, I'll see what I decide to do with that and how I'm going to mount the rest of it. Depends on what I find when I check the measurements. I've got an engineer's straight edge and I may just lay it on all the operating surfaces along the bed and check them all with a feeler gauge just to see how much they've worn. If they've only worn a little bit in the middle and nothing at the ends, then I'll consider the option of scraping them down so that they're even across the length. I don't like this old-fashioned clamp arrangement, so I'll put on one of the quick release piston arrangements on the top, and I think that's really all to say about it to start with, and I'll just add in various comments as I get further on. I'll work out a gearing ratio set that I think I'm going to be able to use all the gears without having to add to them to do the gear cutting that I need. It was originally this rather black and uninspiring colour, and I think I'm in favour of colouring it the Lorch new colour, as it were, that they used. So I'll take some video as I go through it